Hello guys and welcome to episode 36 of the Beat Your Backlog podcast, a podcast discussing the things gamers like to put off, get to another day, and oh yes, will definitely beat later, their backlog. I'm your host Adam, and today we are in a slightly seedier part of the Mushroom Kingdom as we play Nintendo's remastered 2004 classic Paper Mario and the Thousand Year Door. This game has been on my wish list to be remade and brought to the Nintendo Switch for a very long time. And if you follow my content for a little while, you might know that the first thing that really attracts me to a video game is its art style. And in my opinion, Paper Mario has one of the best art styles in the industry. However, until now, I've never played a Paper Mario game because everyone more or less says that the Thousand Year Door is the best one and it's the one you should play first. And typically with Nintendo though, going back to play these older games is never the easiest thing in the world to do unless you either already own the original hardware, so in this case the GameCube and the original game, which I don't, unluckily, because the game is quite expensive to buy, or you do the thing of you go and pirate the game and play it on some kind of emulator, which I also don't really do because I'm too lazy to set it up. Therefore, I was thrilled that Nintendo announced the game would be getting a remaster and or remake on the Switch and that it would be releasing on May 23rd, 2024. And it seems the video game industry has also been very, very happy about the remake, since the game sits at a very respectable 88 on both Metacritic and OpenCritic, with a whopping 99% of critics recommending the game on OpenCritic. Speaking of critics, here is what Logan Plant from IGN had to say about the game. Paper Mario has finally returned to its RPG roots with an amazingly loyal and visually dazzling remake of the Thousand Year Door. Everything fans have been begging Nintendo to bring back is here, including a delightfully varied turn-based battle system with satisfying real-time elements and unique, lovable party members who are essential to both the story and the gameplay. This all sounds very impressive. However, as someone who's never played the original, how much of the critics' accolades come from nostalgia, and can a game that is 20 years old, which is crazy to think about, be really as good as everyone says it is? Well, let's find out in this episode of the Beat Your Backlog podcast. So let's first talk about the story, and as the famous saying goes, it's Mario, Jim, but not as we know it. As I said in the start of the episode, the Thousand Year Door takes place in a very different, seedier part of the Mario world in a place called Rogueport, which is a port town filled with criminals, pirates, and vagabonds. Instead of the usual primary colours, Peach's castle and giant mushrooms, the opening scene of the game is a run-down, graffitied brick town with a hangman's noose in the middle of its town square. A very different vibe to what you get in the usual Mario games. From the get-go, this Mario game isn't like other Mario games, but it does quickly turn into the same rigmarole as we find out on her holiday. Princess Peach has decided to visit Rogueport. Soon, the princess gets kidnapped by who other than ... the X-Nauts. Haha, got you. You probably thought it was Bowser. And yeah, like I said, I told you this wasn't your typical Mario game. So yeah, the princess gets captured, but not by Bowser in this game. And yes, the X-Nauts, and if you don't know who they are a group of small, cute, goggle-wearing creatures led by Grodus, who is a bigger version of these creatures with a huge glass kind of head and brain. And it's very unusual because we're used to the kind of Bowser and the Koopa Troopers kidnapping Peach, but in this game it's a completely different protagonist. And unbeknown to the X-Nauts, Peach had visited Rogueport because of one of the town's ancient myths that Rogueport was built on top of a fabled kingdom, destroyed by an event known as the Cataclysm. Supposedly within the old kingdom is the Thousand Year Door, which, when opened, will reveal a vast treasure. In her research about the town, Princess Peach finds a magical treasure map, which she believes holds the key to opening the Thousand Year Door. Peach decides to send the map to her friend Mario for safekeeping, which turns out to be a wise decision because soon after sending it, she is caught by the X-Nauts and held captive in their base. Upon receiving the map, Mario heads to Rogueport to find Princess Peach and unlock the secrets of the map. There, he receives help from Gumbella, a Goomba that studies history and has a special interest in Rogueport lore and kind of myths. Together, the two of them seek out Gumbella's mentor, Professor Frankly, who tells Mario that he believes the map will lead him to 7 crystal stars, which once collected will open the Thousand Year Door. In the meantime, Peach manages to infiltrate the X-Nauts base with the help of a kind of double agent, and I won't I won't spoil who the double agent is, and she discovers that they too are seeking the 7 crystal stars. Peach informs Mario via email, which I thought was quite funny, because remember, this game was originally made in 2004, so email was all arranged back then. So it becomes a race between Mario, the X-Nauts, and later even Bowser for the secrets of the Thousand Year Door. And as you might have guessed, the 7 crystal stars take Mario to 7 different, very different regions that play out in various different ways, which in my opinion was good because it made the game feel varied. However, with some locations, the pacing of the game slowed down, so much so that it started to drag. Nevertheless, what I loved about the locations were that they are not like the typical Mario ones. So, in most Mario games, there's going to be an ice world, there's going to be a fire world, there's going to be a desert world. Whereas in this game, each of the 7 locations felt unique and memorable. And even if I think 2 of them I kind of felt were a bit slow to progress through, the others, not even the others, they all felt very, very memorable and were very different and just unique and just not what we really have seen in Mario games since then. And my personal favourites are the maze like the Great Boggly Tree, where you get introduced to these little characters called the Punies, and there is some amazing Japanese flute music that plays there. And the other one is Twilight Town, with the mystery of the bell chimes and the pigs. And again, I don't want to spoil it, but it's a very cool mystery, and again, a really cool looking, kind of has like a Nightmare Before Christmas sort of vibe to it. Very cool area to be in. And on the other hand, the 2 worlds that kind of felt a bit slow to me were Glitzville, where Mario and his crew have to fight their way up through the ranks of the Pit, which is a wrestling arena. And the reason they're fighting their way up through the ranks is because the championship belt holds the 3rd crystal star. When you hear it like this, it sounds actually like a really cool story, and I would say the story is really cool. The problem is that the gameplay turns into you have to fight your way through 20 really, really easy fights to get to rank 1, and then once you get to rank 1, you can take on the champion, Rock Hawk, for a shot at the title, and these 20 fights just drag on and drag on. And there is kind of like, the story is kind of intertwined within these fights, but this section, the fights just take too long. Like, it would have been way faster and a lot smoother if there was only 10 fights. But even so, the story is good, but the fights just slowed things down. And then the second part of the game, which I felt was too slow, was the XS Express train to Poshley Heights. And this section is sort of like a parody of the Murder on the Orient Express. And Mario has to investigate a series of mysterious events with the help, or I suppose hindrance, depending on how you look at it, of Pennington, the rather undeductive penguin, which is, very kind of tongue-in-cheek and funny. He keeps saying, he keeps calling Mario Luigi by mistake. Very funny, again, well written. But and the story aspect is very, very cool. But the actual activities are you mostly just running up and down a train, talking to people, trying to pass the time to work out what the mystery is. And it does become quite boring quite fast. Nevertheless, the general kind of story of the Thousand Year Door is by far the best I've experienced in the Mario game. Like I said, the story itself is fantastic. It's well written, it's charming, and at times it's really, really funny. It does just have a couple of pacing issues in these 2 sections. But my favourite highlight, and I guess maybe Easter egg in the game, is Luigi is in the game. He's not part of your party, but he does pop up after every sort of chapter of the game ends. And he's on his own mythic quest to save the Princess Eclair, which is quite funny. And I can't remember what the kingdom it's called, like the Dessert Kingdom or the Sweet Kingdom or something like that. And it's really funny because every time Luigi kind of gives you an update or tells you the next chapter of his story, Mario and whoever Mario's current companion is both fall asleep whilst he's telling you the story, as if like Luigi is just boring him, which I thought was really funny. But I also thought it's quite interesting because Luigi's story did sound interesting, and I was like, I would have been so cool, like, if in this modern era they had done some sort of DLC spin-off with Luigi, as like, now you go on his quest and you collect his 7, I can't remember what he's looking for, but he's also looking for 7 items to unlock something. I'm like, that would have been a cool kind of spin-off game. And in addition, I really just love the quirkiness of the story in general. Like, it really reminds me of the sort of the weird and silly aspects of games like Earthbound or Undertale. Like, there's some kind of surreal aspects to it where in Paper Mario, I felt like the writers were just really focusing on making the story fun and as unique as possible. And they really did this by adding interesting characters and events within the story, set it in really interesting locations, and they weren't really worried about the lore of Mario. Like, so for one example, they have of it being just kind of funny and silly for silly and funny's sake. Close to the start of the game, you meet a Koopa called Koops, who decides to join you on your quest to search for his missing father. And at the end of his sort of world, you enter a castle, and in the castle there is a dragon that has been killing all of these Koopas. So there are bone piles of Koopas all over the floor, and it's just kind of like this really dark humor, because when Koopa sees the piles of bones, he keeps going to them and asking, "Oh, Dad, is that you? No, okay, that's not him." Then he goes to the next, "Dad, is that you?" And it kind of goes on like this, and it's just not something that you would expect to see in a Mario game, because it is so dark and it is kind of a bit like taboo. But it is just kind of like laugh out loud funny, and I really really liked it, and I think it's what makes this game memorable and just so funny. And I think it's interesting because even though this game is 20 years old, it feels so refreshing for the Mario series. Like it just does things that we haven't seen really in the last 20 years in Mario, and it's really obvious why this game is so beloved, because of its story and its amazing characters. And I think you have to remember that like this game was made before Super Mario Bros. Came out on the Nintendo DS, so it was before Mario kind of got sanitized with its art style and its characters, and this kind of art style and characters has kind of been the standard for all Mario games up until Super Mario Bros. Wonder, which came out at the end of last year. And I feel like this sanitization rolled over into Paper Mario. Like I said, I haven't played any other Paper Mario games, but looking at reviews of Paper Mario and I watched I don't know what they call them, but kind of like a documentary of from Scott the Woz, where he was talking about Paper Mario's Color Splash, which was a game that released on the Wii U, and he kind of like explains that like the game there, it also has this sanitization where a lot of the charm of Paper Mario was taken out of it. Like there isn't any unique characters in that game. All of the side characters are just different colored toads, and they're all male toads, and it's just so like, you know, like, oh well, as Nintendo, like what do people know about Mario? They know that Mario has toads in them. Cool, let's just make all of the side characters in the game toads, and people will be happy with that. And I think, yeah, it's a shame, but it's kind of great that Nintendo seems to be rewriting the book with Mario, at least from the last year or so. Like it started with Super Mario Bros. Wonder, with the amazing art style that they introduced there, and also just the concept that every single level within the game is just something different, and really is a wonder. You don't know what's going to happen in the level. And so far it's continued with the Super Mario RPG remake, which I actually just ordered the day I'm recording. It's Amazon Prime Day, and it was on sale, so I just ordered it off of Amazon, with its kind of chibi looking art style. And it's a game that I think people never ever imagined would be remade because of all of the different rights between Nintendo and Square Enix. And then, of course, now they have Paper Mario and the Thousand Year Door remake, which, again, just feels completely refreshing to the franchise. And hopefully it's going to continue, because they just announced in their latest Direct this Mario and Luigi Brothership game, which I think a lot of people also thought maybe we wouldn't see any more of these because they were sort of locked on the DS and the 3DS. But they seem to be bringing it back. Or moving it forward, I should say, with again a really interesting looking art style that is sort of similar to what the game was on the 3DS. They didn't just decide like, oh, let's put it on the Switch and have this really generic art style that you see in a lot of Mario games. So yeah, I think it's an exciting time to be a Mario fan. And going back to the companions like Coop, you meet a lot along the way, and they also make this game feel so unique. But before we start discussing these amazing characters, I would like to remind you that if you're enjoying the podcast, please leave us a 5-star review on Spotify or wherever you're listening. And now let's get in a little bit deeper with these characters. So with the characters themselves, I don't want to spoil them, because there might be a lot of people listening who are similar to me that have never played this game before and don't really have any history at all with the original release in 2004. But yeah, so far I've mentioned two. They're two that you meet very, very early on in the game, Gumbella and Koops. Gumbella, in my opinion, was my least favorite character, and I think she's mostly meant to be there as like a help companion. And what she can do is, if you have her as your companion out, so it's kind of like a bit like in Pokemon, like Gold and Heart Gold and Soul Silver, where you can choose one companion to be your main one, and they'll follow you around the world. With Gumbella, you can ask her to give you information on characters, so it kind of gives you like a little hint of like, my main mission is I'm looking for this character. Then you can select the character when you're near them, and Gumbella will say, oh yeah, this is the guy that you're looking for, more or less. And she will also, by clicking ZL, she will give you a hint of like where you should go next. So she'd be like, all right, I remember we were looking for this person, or we were going to this location. So kind of nice that if you haven't played for the game for a couple of days, you can bring her out, press ZL, and she'll tell you what happens. Also in battle, she has, I think it's called the Gummipedia or something like that, where you can use it and she will give you information on your enemies. So if you're kind of new to the game and you want to learn what the enemy's stats are and what their attacks are, you can do that. And there's also kind of like a cool, it's like a bestiary. So the more you do it on, the more it fills up the book and the bestiary, and the more information you have on the different characters, which is, or the different enemies, I should say, which is quite interesting. But her herself as a character, I didn't really like that much. She was my least favorite. Coops, on the other hand, he was one of my favorites. He's a self-conscious Cooper from a place called Petalburg, and after finding his father, spoilers, his father lives, Coops decides to join Mario permanently to help him find the crystal stars and to help Coops find his own inner strength. He's a clumsy, shy Cooper, but he has a great arc throughout the game where he learns, how to be strong. He learns a lot about himself, and at the end, it has a cool, happy ending for him. And as for the other characters, like I said, I don't want to spoil them, but I did really like each of them in their own way. They're all varied, they're all very interesting. But my favorite by far was the companion you find in Glitzville. Don't want to spoil who it is or what it is, but they are very, very cool. So keep an eye out for them if you're playing the game for the first time. And the thing that I really liked about the companions is that in total you unlock 7 of them, and I really like that all of them have unique dialogue when chosen to walk with Mario. So in the game, the companions act as Mario's voice and kind of react to the events around him for him. So there's no dialogue or text for Mario. There's no dialogue at all in the game. It's all just text based. But yeah, if a character asks Mario questions, a companion will answer for Mario. Mario never has any dialogue at all, kind of like in all of the Mario games. But what is cool is that they don't just stay like a standardized text, aka it's not the same text for every single companion, but for every companion it's completely unique what they answer. So it means if you wanted to, you could kind of play through the game 7 times, and each with a different companion as the main one, and each time you would have a slightly different experience. And yeah, I like it because the game, I think, does a really good job of making you want to switch out which companion you're with. Even though I had a favorite, I felt like I had quite a good balance of different companions at different times, mostly to do with like the story beats of the game, because yeah, it's more or less every new area you go to, you unlock a companion there. So it makes sense that you want that companion to be out because it's their area and they will interact more with the story. But it was just nice that they just didn't kind of go to the cheap way to be like, all right, doesn't matter who you're with, they just give you the same line of text. Each companion has like very fleshed out sort of personalities and character traits that are reflected in the text, and it was just kind of cool to be able to switch between them and see how a different companion might react to the same event as a different companion. And it just felt like a nice detail and just the quality you would want from a Nintendo game, which was awesome. So far we've talked about the story, we've talked about the characters and companions, and now we're going to move on to the combat. And Paper Mario I'm kind of assuming sort of invented this reaction / quick time turn-based combat system. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll try and do my best to explain. So in the battle, you always play as Mario and one of his companions. So there's always two of you in a battle, and it's usually versus 1 to 4 enemies, depending on the different enemy types. The battles are always turn-based, usually starting with Mario, then your companion, then the enemy. And the aim of the game is to eliminate all enemies before Mario runs out of HP. Nothing too innovative there about the turn-based battle system. But if you beat all enemies Mario is rewarded with star points, and if he manages to collect 100, Mario's star rank raises, aka he gets a level up, which as my first Mario RPG was a little bit weird the first time it happened, to be like, oh, okay, I didn't realize there was levels to this. You know, in Mario games, in platformers, there are no levels, there's no skill tree or anything, so it was kind of weird the first time it happened. But leveling in the game is quite straightforward. There are 3 choices the player can choose from at every level up, and that is to either increase their HP, their FP, or their BP. But we'll talk more on these later. Mario has 3 major different types of attacks. The first is a jump attack, which by pressing A at the height of Mario's jump will cause extra damage. His second attack is his trusty hammer. When swinging it, a meter pops up on the screen. By holding the left joystick to the left, the meter will start to fill up. And if you release the joystick at the exact moment the meter fills, Mario will swing his hammer and do extra damage. These first 2 moves cost FP, which stands for flower points, and this system is sort of similar to using mana in other RPGs. So you have a set amount of flower points, and if Mario runs out of flower points, he can't use the more complex jump and hammer attacks. So I think I can't remember exactly, but I think the basic ones don't cost any, or they might cost like 1 or 2 flower points, whereas the more complex moves cost like maybe 5 or 6. So yeah, once you run out, you have to then try to regen your flower points somehow, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Mario's third attack is his special move, and you can unlock more of these special moves the more crystal stars you find, and each move has its own minigame associated with it that you have to complete to do more damage. Special moves range from healing the party to kind of drawing circles around enemies to do damage to them, to also doing sort of like rhythm-based tapping, where there is a meter with different letters on it, which you have to tap in time as the meter fills up. So it's kind of like that. Each one is sort of like a mini game, and these special moves cost star power, which Mario has as much star power as he has crystal stars. Therefore, at the start of the game, he starts off with 1 SP, and by the end of the game, he has 7. And each special move costs a certain amount of star power. So some might cost 1 or 2 SP, but others might cost 5 or 6 SP. And I like the variation in the cost of the special moves, but the limitation of the star power that you get, because it meant you had to be really strategic about which moves you use and when you use them. For example, should you try to use a lot of cheaper moves one after the other, or should you try and go hard with an expensive move in a sort of Hail Mary and hope that you do enough damage to beat an opponent? And yeah, star power is regenerated by impressing the audience that watches each of your battles. So yeah, each battle is kind of an interesting theme. Each battle takes place on a stage with an audience. At the start of the game, your audience is quite small. I think it starts off at about 50 people, or can fill up to maximum 50 people. But at the end of the game, you have a much larger one with, I think it's either 150 or 200. And the size of your audience increases with your star rank level. So I think it's like every 10 ranks, you increase the audience. And if you're performing well in battle by landing perfectly timed attacks or perfectly timed blocks, which can negate all damage, the crowd will cheer and fill up your star power. Be careful though, if the crowd is full of enemy units, so if you're in like an enemy's dungeon or whatever, the crowd will mostly be enemy units. They might throw things at Mario or tamper with the stage. So you always have to have one eye on the audience to make sure they don't interfere. And if they do, or it looks like they will, you can press the X button and Marion and or his companion will jump into the crowd and throw the audience member out. In addition, Mario and his companions can use items in battle. These can replenish HP or FP, or do direct damage to an enemy, or even do status damage to enemies. The game overloads you with items, which might sound quite good, but you are only limited to carrying 15 separate items at a time. I don't know if this is like, the old Pokemon games where it was like a memory issue that they couldn't save more. But this kind of limit does get a bit annoying, because you have to manage your inventory all the time because you're getting a lot of items, and because I didn't especially use that many items in combat, so it's always kind of like, okay, should I keep the red mushroom that heals like 10 HP, or should I swap it out for the green mushroom that heals 50 HP, stuff like that. And finally, there is BP, which stands for badge points, and the more of these you have, the more badges you can equip. And within the game, there are dozens of badges to find and collect, each one doing a multitude of different things. For example, some badges let you do more powerful jump and hammer attacks. Some increase Mario and his companion's stats by buffing kind of their attack or their defense, while others can be equipped for quality of life, things like instantly killing low level enemies without having to fight them. There are also some kind of accessory badges you can find that change Mario's outfit into Waluigi's outfit or Luigi's outfit, which were quite cool, just kind of changing the look of the game a little bit. So yeah, there are lots and lots of different types of badges, and you can find them in the world, or there is a badge shop in Rogueport where you can go and buy them. And yeah, sorry if this was quite a big tirade of information. Even though Paper Mario is quote-unquote a kid's game, its combat system has a lot of depth and intricacies. What I like is that the combat has so many quick time events or rhythm challenges that it always kept the combat engaging. Right now I'm actually playing Pokemon Scarlet, and it's not like Pokemon games where it's a turn-based game where you're just spamming A to get through the fight as quickly as possible because you just want to skip everything, beat the enemy as fast as possible and move on. In this game, you really have to watch the animations to make sure your attacks and blocks are perfect. There is the thing with the audience where you want to keep an eye on the audience to make sure they're not throwing stuff at you. And there is stuff on the stage where like maybe a light falls off or part of the stage decoration falls over, and you want to make sure you're ready to block it and you don't take any damages that way. So you're always sort of looking and engaged in each battle. However, I must say that from about the third hour of the game, combat does not really evolve from what I just told you. So it's kind of like quickly gets you in, and you, pretty early on in the game, you know exactly what the combat is. This is it kind of thing. And considering that this game took me almost dead on 30 hours to beat, it meant that for a good portion of the game, combat could be quite boring. Even though you had something to do, you had to concentrate a little bit, it was very repetitive. One thing that I did think was good though was how quickly Mario levels up. So for every level you only needed 100 coins, and the more difficult enemies you beat, the more coins you got, or flower tokens or whatever I said they were called. I've forgotten the name now. Flower points or star points I think it's called. Yeah, you always needed 100. So the more difficult enemies you beat, you might get like 12. So it's like if you go and fight 10 different enemies, 10 of those enemies, you get enough to level up. And I liked it because it then gives you the option to play around with your FP so that you can do better moves in battle, or your BP so you can kind of add new badges to Mario to do different things. But nevertheless, again, pretty early on, I kind of had a badge build that I liked, so it didn't really change the badges for the rest of the game. In addition, I would say that the combat was quite easy. I think I only ever died once, and that was on the final boss because I thought it was supposed to be a stage death. Like the boss comes out quite hard and I would say, kind of falls into that camp of in older games, kind of a bit like what I was arguing with Metroid Prime Remaster, where the final boss just seems to be like a massive difficulty spike compared to the rest of the game, to try to eke out like a few extra hours for the player to be like, all right, well, now you've got to the final boss has to be really, really hard. It's the same in this game where the boss is really hard, so much so that it made me really think like, oh, it's purposefully hard because you were supposed to die and then something will happen in the story. But no, it's not. It's just a difficult boss, and it does take quite a lot of it's very specific sort of sequence of events that you have to do to really get enough damage done to the boss in the time it takes before the boss basically kills you, which is a little bit annoying because, like I said, otherwise the game was pretty straightforward and not very challenging at all. And yeah, obviously this kind of type of combat is quite old now, like especially if you've played the Paper Mario games, you know the combat. But one like more modern indie game that I really like that kind of took this Paper Mario combat and improved on it is a game called Underhero by Paper Castle Games. It's an absolutely fantastic game. So if you've already played The Thousand Year Door, maybe you're listening to this, you've already beaten it because it's, we're nearly 2 months out from when it released. And you're itching for more Paper Mario combat, make sure you check out that game. It's on Steam and Nintendo Switch. Again, it's called Underhero by Paper Castle Games. So yeah, so that was the combat in the game. Like I said, it was quite straightforward, a little bit repetitive, but still sort of engaging. And now I would like to talk about the art style, because as I said at the start of the episode, the art style of Paper Mario is one of my favorites in mainstream video games. I absolutely adore the 2D characters with their thick sort of sticker-like stroke around them, and then mashing them into a 3D cardboard-looking world looks fantastic to me. I loved it in all of the Nintendo games that do that kind of like, yeah, they bring in like this realistic sort of texturized look. Like there is the Kirby's Magic Yarn, there is the Yoshi Woolly World games, there's Paper Mario. All of this I just think is just so interesting to look at and just so different. And for me, Paper Mario is my favorite, just because I love the 2D characters and how good they look. And yeah, I think it's especially good looking in this game. It's stunning. I think it's one of the few games so far that has made me wish I had a Nintendo Switch OLED, because I would have just loved to see those colors in the game pop even more. Even though I said at the start of the game that there's not really like the typical Mario, you know, greens and reds and whites and blues. It still has a lot of, it's still very vibrant, it's still very colourful, even though the world is meant to look a little bit more, at least at the start, a little bit more beaten down. And there are obviously different areas that are very colourful, and like I said, all of the areas are really unique and really beautiful to look at. But yeah, it's just a gorgeous looking game. Also, the bosses I think look amazing. They also do this really awesome job of mixing in sort of 2D assets with 3D assets. All of their animations look great. The bosses themselves are just very memorable. Like their character designs are very memorable. And yeah, I think the game is just brought together perfectly. And I think it's by far one of the best looking Nintendo games on the Nintendo Switch, or in general one of the best looking games on Nintendo Switch, even if it doesn't run at the 60 FPS that the original game did on the GameCube back in 2004. And yeah, this was the big sort of topic about the game just before release, that it didn't run at 60 frames per second, even though the GameCube game does. But yeah, on this topic, I honestly didn't notice a difference at 30 frames per second. I think the game ran really, really well. It ran like butter. It looked gorgeous. So for me, that wasn't a big issue. One thing that was a big issue, though, was the music, because the original soundtrack of the game had been completely redone for this remaster. And I have to say, yeah, the modern soundtrack was actually the biggest letdown of the game for me. You can tell that the team working on the game was not Nintendo's A team. Like, you could just kind of, the quality wasn't there. Like it wasn't like a string orchestra making this music, and I generally found like the tracks to be very overwhelming, not well balanced at all. Like some instruments were just too loud and distracting, and in general the tracks just weren't pleasant to listen to, in a sense of the composition of the tracks. The tracks themselves, the melodies were great, but just how they had modernized them, it just felt weird. It just felt too loud and too distracting and just hard to listen to. And it was so much so that in the game there is actually a badge where you can equip it, and it plays the original retro tunes from the GameCube game, which as soon as I got, I actually equipped. And then actually towards the end of the game, I also was a bit like, you know what, this game, as much as I love a lot of it, the music was not my favorite thing. So it was one of the games where I put on a podcast, listened to the podcast whilst I played, because the music really didn't stand out that well to me, which was a shame, because everything else about the game was, top quality. So yeah, just to round off the episode then, at the start of the show I asked if Paper Mario and the Thousand Year Door reviewed well, because of the nostalgia critics had towards the game. And yes, of course, I'm sure a lot of the critics had played the original game and had some attachment to them, which maybe slightly affected their review score. But I can say, as someone who has never played the game or played any other Paper Mario games before, that the Thousand Year Door is an absolutely fantastic game that is a must play for Switch owners. Especially if, like me, you had sort of gotten sick of Mario games from the last 10 to 15 years and have the feeling that they all feel pretty much the same. Paper Mario and the Thousand Year Door is kind of like a breath of fresh air, even though the remake of the game is 20 years old. It's absolutely chock full of weird and wonderful characters, unique and memorable locations, and has a fantastic Mario story, which for the first time actually made me care about these characters. The combat in the game is interesting and maybe feels now a little outdated, since the reaction/quick-time event combat has evolved since then. However, I like the flexibility of the badges and being able to build out your Mario to fit your playstyle, and though it did get repetitive, the combat always felt engaging. Furthermore, with a fresh coat of paint, the game looks stunning with its mix of 2D characters and 3D backgrounds. In addition, even though the game came out towards the end of the Switch's life cycle and is locked at just 30 frames per second, I think this game is one of the best looking games on the Switch ever. So, if you're on the fence and have been waiting to pull the trigger on this game, I hope this podcast gives you the nudge you need to go out and buy it, because you will not regret it. And yeah, guys, that has been episode 36 of the Beat Your Backlog podcast. Are you already playing Paper Mario and the Thousand Year Door? Have you already finished it? Or are you planning on picking it up now because of this podcast? As always, you can let me know directly if you're a Spotify listener by commenting on the questions below in the description. And if you're listening anywhere else, you can let me know on social media by @me at SwitchIndieFix on Twitter. I really want to know if you have any nostalgia, or if you played the original games and you played the remake, and what you think. And if there are more games like this, there are more Paper Mario games that you would love to see remade. I would love to see the original one. Either it might already be, is it already on the Nintendo Switch Online? Actually, I'm not sure about that. But if it's not, I would love to see it be remade and put on the Switch, because this game is meant to be like a sequel to it. So I would love to play the original one. And if you're in the mood to listen to more content about Nintendo's mustachioed mascot, make sure you check out episode 19 of the podcast, where I review Super Mario Bros. Wonder. It was the first Mario sort of 2D side-scroller platformer that I ever finished, so make sure you go and check out that review. And as always, guys, I just want to remind you that Beat Your Backlog is a new podcast and needs your support. If you enjoyed the episode, please consider subscribing and or following wherever you are listening, and leaving us a 5-star review. Reviews help new people find the podcast, so it would be wonderful if you could leave us one. Thanks so much for listening. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye bye.